Hello, everybody. Welcome back to WattWorks, Edgecom Energy's podcast. This is episode number 4. Whether you're listening to this on YouTube or Spotify, thank you very much. Today, I'm joined by Eric Asagba, and we are going to be talking about demand response.
Happy to be here.
So jumping right into it, Eric, I think it's important to just kind of talk a little bit about what demand response is and how it started.
Absolutely. So demand response is a program that allows the largest energy users to be able to reduce or shift their electricity usage during times of stress on the grid. And how it's set up is really you get a financial incentive if you can do that, right? It's a great program. I feel like, unlike Europe, it's not mandated in North America, but it's a very good program where we can actually support the grid and avoid blackouts and burnouts.
Yeah, and I think it's funny to talk to a lot of people about the history of the demand response program, because a lot of the times the nature of the program and people hearing, hey, you can get paid just to be available to shut down. And people either think you're ridiculous or it's a scam, or they don't understand why that would possibly exist. But for those that have been in Canada for a long time, it actually dates all the way back to there was a big brownout on the grid in 2005.
Right.
Pretty much the entire Toronto region lost power during a summer heat wave for 4 or 5 days. And that really kicked the government and the Ministry of Energy into high gear of, oh, this is like a real problem.
Right.
I think up until that point, there was a preconceived notion that there was just infinite energy to go around and we could just burn coal, burn nuclear's coming, solar, like everything is just, our problems are always going to be solved. But what we've realized as time goes on is that's not real. And we need to kind of be respectful with the boundaries that we have.
Absolutely.
And it first started with the government actually trying to offload the costs to consumers. And what that did was it drove people out of Ontario, because who wants to pay, 18 cents a kilowatt hour for their electricity? Nobody. And then they shifted it on to manufacturers.
Yeah.
And when they did that, that's when we saw a lot of companies actually shift out of Ontario. That's why there's no, Pepsi or Frito-Lay manufacturing in Ontario anymore. It's all in Quebec, because they said, hey, you're going to up our rates. We're not paying that.
Right.
And so the government had to introduce these programs that put the costs on the consumer, but gave them the opportunity to essentially recoup it. So it's, hey, we need to charge these rates to have emergency backup plans in place, but you can participate in these programs, and because you're not causing a problem for us, you're going to be rewarded for it. And for those people who can participate, it's really effective to participate in Ontario, because the savings and the money you can make is incredible. And demand response specifically, I think is important to note as well, is it's the backup to the backup program, right? It's a third resort. And that's why they pay people just for being available in the program,
Right.
Because otherwise, why would you do it, right? Nobody wants to shut down their production. We have things to sell. We have people or customers to please.
Yep.
But there's always that level, that levy of, if it reaches a certain cost point, I can justify the lack of production.
Absolutely. And, just, thinking about it, when there is a need for additional capacity on the grid, we can only look to the peaker plants, right? And those are quite expensive to run. So it makes sense for the local grid operator to actually compensate available resources that can support the grid in those times and offer a very lucrative financial incentive, right? So a lot of businesses usually have the notion that, it's maybe impossible for them to curtail some load, or they just don't have the operational flexibility. But, we've been able to work with a lot of current participants to really understand their process, right? Figure out where they have non-essential loads that they can curtail. And, it almost becomes a culture shift where all of a sudden it's like, we can curtail that. We can shut that off. We can shift operations, right? So it becomes very exciting when you can actually take an action. And at the end of the season, you get a financial reward in form of a check. It's a win-win, in my opinion.
Yeah, and a lot of companies, like you said, that culture shift, once that check's on the table, that is the culture shift. that joy of seeing like, oh, we got that. And yeah. I think it's interesting. I'd love to hear a personal story I mean, having both been involved in the industry, there's an apprehension to curtail. And a lot of the times they use their operations as an excuse.
Yeah.
And I can speak for myself. I have automotive customers.
Yes.
And they say, hey, we can't curtail because we have orders to fill, we have this quota to meet, we have these productions, etc. But then I have other automotive customers who have twice the quota, twice the production schedule, half the employees, and they're curtailing upwards of half a megawatt.
Yeah.
So in terms of your personal experience, I'd love to hear anything similar and how you kind of go about recommending to some of those people who are more closed-minded than what reality may be for them.
Absolutely. So, the approach I take is, some manufacturing plants are very mature, right? Some maybe not quite as much. And, the biggest thing is really having a detailed understanding of how your processes work, how they're intertwined, and really understanding where you have essential load and non-essential load, right? I'll give you an example of a very large automotive manufacturer here in Ontario, right? Probably running about 10 megawatts of load, right? The initial, response was, we can't find load to curtail, right? And that's where I think Edgecom does a very great job, and we actually go in and do a complete curtailment action plan analysis with both existing and prospective clients to really help them understand and find those areas where they can curtail, right? So it can be as simple as HVAC, right? It can be as simple as, shifting from one production line to the other during those demand response hours, right? Another thing that's quite useful too is, as we come from the world where we fully believe in you cannot manage what you don't measure, right? So we provide services where you can actually monitor your main and your downstream assets, right? So if you have that granular visibility as to what's going on in your plant, you can very easily determine where there's non-critical load and critical load, and you can also understand what processes are drawing the most power from the grid, right? Now, based on that information, you can really understand, okay, if I have to curtail for, let's call it 4 hours, sometime next week, because I got notified by Edgecom, right? This is where I can find that operational flexibility to actually curtail. Now, in the grand scheme of things, right, we have 365 days in a year, right? Majority of such operations run 24/7 or maybe 24/5, right? And we know for a fact that with demand response, it is between 8 hours and a maximum of 20 hours, right? Less than a day. So we can easily, again, understand where we have that operational flexibility for less than a day in a 365-day year to collect $80,000 per megawatt.
Yeah, and there's a couple directions that are really interesting to go in from here. I think one thing you touched on is operational flexibility.
Yes.
Elephant in the room, we're not trying to deject reality. Automotive manufacturers have it a lot harder than batch processors for cement, where they can make, thousands of pounds of the mix and then process it later, right? So I think it's ignorant on our part to say that there's equal flexibility, yes. But it's true that every single facility has flexibility to curtail in these programs, right? Whether that's, you have to bring your HVAC from 21 degrees to 22 degrees, yep. Or you're able to shut down the entire plant. Obviously, the amount of money that you can earn and save is scales. But to say that there's no flexibility in any plant is just unwillingness to kind of take that jump and improve. And I think one of the things that goes hand in hand with that flexibility is those individuals that are trying to kind of champion demand response for their facilities,
right,
is the importance of creativity.
Yes.
Right. So many times, just last week, I was in a plant and they're trying to think about their food processing. They process pigs. And they're thinking, well, we work with livestock, so all of our timings are really tight. So we can't really afford to delay anything. And I was like, okay, well, what's your production? Like, are you guys 24/7? Because if it's 24/7, you start, that is lowering our flexibility a bit.
Right.
Say, well, we're 24/5. Okay, do you guys ever work any overtime? And they say, not all the time, but it's something that we're unionized and totally okay with doing if we ever have backlog.
Right.
How often do you have backlog? A few times a quarter. So then it started sparking that conversation of, okay, well, demand response is only a couple times as well.
Correct. Yeah.
So if you're willing to overtime your employees on that Saturday for backlog, that's just you catching up on already earned business.
Right.
Why not backlog it a couple of times throughout the rest of the year? And in this case in particular, this company is one that could make $500,000.
There you go.
And then that boiler that's been sitting there for the past 30 years that they need to upgrade, there's the funding for it. The other program they wanted to participate in that they were scared to, there's the justification and the funding to try it.
Yes.
Right? And that little bit of creativity, and not just thinking, I think there's a preconceived notion that companies, they go in, they hear the word curtailing or demand response, and they think, I need to shut everything down, turn it off, lights off, nothing. We sit in the darkness, we don't work.
Yeah.
And the immediate thought to that is, well, if my guys aren't working, I'm not making money.
Exactly.
So getting paid for this program is stupid. But again, it's that lack of creativity and how can I double dip? How can I win both situations?
Absolutely.
And those that are kind of willing to take the jump and go into it are the ones that win out on top.
I agree. And you just touched on funding, right? You know, I've worked with a couple of current participants where the payments that they get from this program literally covers 1 to 2 months of their electricity bill. Now, from working in the industry, we understand that the biggest cost for most businesses is energy and labor, right? So if you're able to actually cover 2 months of your energy cost, that's quite significant, right? And that's money that you never had, on your balance sheet the year before, right? Net new revenue.
Yeah, and I find with working at a lot of these places, they continuously get better.
Yes.
Because as we introduce that flexibility, that creativity to them, things pop up all the time.
Yeah.
We work with a company, they came on board for demand response and they started 100 kilowatts. It was very we helped them with auxiliary loads. It was very much, hey, you need to freeze these things at -4 degrees, but if you freeze it in advance to -5, freezers are really good at holding their temperature.
Yes.
So you can easily ride through a 4-hour window without actually powering the compressor. And so that was kind of what started them with 100 kilowatts.
Yes.
And then again, as they saw that check come in, it was, oh, this is nice. How can we get more? How can we get more of this? And now they're up to 550 kilowatts,
Yeah.
which, by grand scheme, there's companies that they'll shut down 20 megawatts in a moment's notice.
Yes.
So it's not to say that 500 kilowatts is an insane amount, but for somebody that thought that they had no operational flexibility,
Yeah.
to receive $45,000 at the end of the year is pretty nice.
Absolutely.
In any event.
Absolutely.
And I think one of the situations that I'd love to hear your opinion on is there are some segments of the market, I'd say, that it's very valid when they say they don't want to participate in demand response. I think a great example for me is a casino.
Yes.
Right? The only curtailment possible is lowering the quality of life for those people gambling. And the infinite market revenues from those people is greater than any demand response payment. But with the introduction and more accessibility to renewables and generators,
Yes.
I'd love to hear your long-term opinion on how not only how people can take advantage of generative assets today, but the future of them and how you think they'll actually impact the program overall.
Absolutely. So one of the easiest ways to actually participate in a demand response is using on-site batteries, right? If you have a battery big enough to, kick in during those demand response events, there's no disruption to your operations, right? So manufacturing can go on as normal. Now, the interesting thing too is if your battery is just big enough to last you for the 4 hours, that's really all you need to participate in demand response. Then you can charge it during the off-peak hours, right? In Ontario, there are certain industries that are, lucky enough to be able to use diesel-powered generators to participate. Those guys literally earn the most from the program because they can just literally turn on their generator sets, right? In terms of looking at the future, there's a lot of talk about AIs and obviously data centers, which are actually perfect participants in demand response. There's going to be a lot of, innovation in being able to use an AI automation system to manage those battery assets, right? So instead of you having, a maintenance technician on site to literally turn on those assets when it's time to curtail, we could actually manage it from an office offsite somewhere. It's as simple as just pushing a button, deactivates the battery, shifts to load completely, and then once that event is done, flips it back to the other side and it's back running again, right? So we fully understand that, especially in energy, is just going to continue to evolve with innovation, and it's just how we can actually integrate, DER assets, virtual power plants, and really understanding what goes into that process of managing, peak demands. There's hope arbitrage, for example, in Ontario, where you can actually understand when there's going to be a peak and possibly shift your load to the off-peak time as well, right? So a lot of good things are happening.
Yeah, and I think one thing you mentioned is your virtual power plants. I'd like to add to that electrical vehicle charging on top of just these compounding renewable assets. Yeah. Do you see the future? Do you see demand response still being a program like it is today? Do you think it's something that'll get phased out completely? Or do you think it's somewhere in the middle?
Phased out completely? Probably not. And I'll kind of expand on that, right? So unlike in North America and in Europe, participating in demand response is actually mandatory, right? It's a policy from the government, right? And if you think about it, the only times that we have to turn on these peaker plants is when there's stress on the grid, right? So if we're thinking about really understanding and tracking our carbon footprint, right? Reducing GHG emissions, it makes sense that, as many assets as possible can support the grid if there is an emergency, right? We spoke about the need of building new natural gas-fired, power plants or nuclear power plants. If we have a very reliable grid, right, that has assets that can support it in times of grid stress, there will not be need for that capital expenditure, right? So it's just looking at it from a social responsibility, right, as an entity in a certain jurisdiction, and also looking at it from, okay, if I can actually participate, I can also get monetary value, right? So that's the whole idea, is really understanding, where is this going? How could it possibly be expanded, right, to reach as many people as possible? And thankfully enough, in Ontario, you don't have to be Class A to participate in demand response, right? It could be a Class B site. You have people that have multiple sites that are Class Bs that are really participating and earning a lot of money from demand response in the years past and even this year to come as well.
Yeah, and one thing you mentioned, Class Bs participating, as automation and AI becomes more prevalent, one of the large participants will actually be condos and commercial buildings, because it's so easy in the existing BMS systems to just, HVAC's off, lighting is halved or dimmed, especially with LED retrofits everywhere.
Yes.
We can control all of these, and it is a great revenue opportunity. And I think there's a lot of naysayers with the longevity of the demand response program in general. I think my favorite example that we can use today is looking at the California grid.
Yes.
So obviously California, 45% of the United States whole economy, right? So it's a powerhouse, quite literally in every capacity.
Agreed. Yep.
And a revolutionary state as well. And so of course they have some of the highest electricity costs, highest electricity usage, et cetera. And circa 10, 15 years ago, they start making this push for batteries, solar, all these renewables, because Arnold Schwarzenegger's pushing it. He's like, hey, let's get this in gear, right? Yeah. And the funny thing is, it was because, again, much like Ontario, California is worried about these brownouts, these blackouts. Now, they were actually getting them pretty frequently, right? You're in Sacramento, all of a sudden you don't have power for 2 days because the water bottling manufacturer next to you decided to use all that was left of the
natural elements as well.
Yeah, exactly. The changing weather, the climate. But we put all these assets in California, and all it really did was actually just shift when these peaks happened, right? It was happening before midday between 1 and 6 p.m. But now we're seeing these huge bell curves. The battery assets charging, discharging, and when the sun goes down, the solar dipping. So we're seeing these unprecedented spikes. And I think in a situation like that, it's important to remember that as our energy sophistication increases, so does our energy usage, right? We'll always use what's available to us. It's natural for businesses.
Absolutely.
And the demand response program is exactly solving those peaks, which when they happen, Not sure, but they will. There will be some problem that needs to be solved for or held accountable for. And I think that's going to keep the program in this way for a long time to come.
Agreed.
Now, I think we're kind of wrapping up on the logistical side here. But I think a lot of people watching this, they might be in a similar situation to what we alluded to, where they're interested in these programs. They know getting a check and just dipping their toes in the water would be a great start to push the future of their energy management.
Yes.
But about getting started, right? So either any advice you have or any points you could touch on of, I'm a manufacturer and I'm looking to kind of get buy-in for the demand response program. What should I look for? What should I recommend to curtail? What can I anticipate getting as a check, right?
Yes, that's a great question. So I think the first step is to address the elephant in the room, right? There's always the notion that it's very complex to participate in demand response. But the good thing is, if you work with an aggregator like Edgecom, right, we actually handle the process end to end, right? So there's no need for you to be worried about, if your site is already registered in the capacity auction, when they're going to get paid, if you're going to get paid, all of that we actually handle, right? So we take away the complexity completely from the customer, and essentially all you have to do is just take action when we have to take action to curtail, right? On top of that, speaking about understanding where you have the operational flexibility, it's good to conduct curtailment action plan analysis, right? So essentially just a walkthrough of your plan, understand your processes, understand what processes are dependent on each other, look for non-essential and essential load, right? And document that process and look for those opportunities to curtail, right? So once you have that, I think the next step is to talk to a seasoned aggregator like Edgecom, right? We can have a sit down, we can go over your usage of megawatts, kilowatts, understand how much of that you can actually curtail for an event. And then with that, we can provide you a well-curated proposal to understand exactly how much you're going to make based on your performance.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly it, right? Is it's finding the external allies that can help support the initiative, right?
Yeah.
Demand response is complicated, but it doesn't have to be. And that's the joy of it. And I think we touched on everything beautifully here today. I like to kind of leave it open at the end if there's any additional comments you'd like to make or topics you'd like to cover.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I think one of the things that really, really helps, sites to participate effectively is having that real-time visibility as to what's going on at the plant, right? So you want to know what's running, when it's running, how much it's using, right? So that way you can have it documented and you can pull on these different data sets to understand your capabilities, right? Understand where you have the operational flexibility. If you know for a fact that your production line 1 and 2 uses the most energy, right? And you really want to maximize how much you make from demand response, and you don't have a critical need for you to run those production lines during that 4-hour window, it makes sense to shift production to a different hour, right? To maximize your potential there, right? So I think, the biggest takeaway is don't shy away from the idea of being able to curtail, because in the beginning, it could be, slightly, difficult, but once you talk to, professionals like us that have been doing this for a while, I understand how complex processes could be and how there is a need for not wanting to shut down. We can help you with these conversations, again, to find those areas where you can curtail some load.
Yeah, and I think summarizing that a bit, wrapping it up, it's you guys can curtail. It's not a matter of yes or no, it's how much.
How much.
And thank you, Eric, for taking the time to speak.
No, thanks for having me.
And thank you guys for listening or watching WattWorks on Spotify, YouTube. Again, we have plenty of resources, more on demand response on our website. And there's so many resources available from both the government and other aggregators even that are all worth checking out. Again, you guys can curtail. It's just a matter of dissecting how much and getting comfortable with that program and kind of removing some of the complications of it.